Now what in Hong Kong is like a circus, or like what happened in the dark ages around the world.
An Orwellian reign of terror has descended on Hong Kong, says pro-democracy activist and former legislator Leung Kwok Hung, also known as Longhair. Hong Kong authorities have arrested pro-democracy activists like 23-year-old Agnes Chow and Apple Daily founder Jimmy Lai. They've disqualified pro-democracy candidates, and they've postponed elections for a year, citing coronavirus dangers. Longhair has been at the epicenter of the pro-democracy movement for years, and he's well known in Hong Kong for his unorthodox methods. He co-founded Hong Kong's League of Social Democrats and served as a Hong Kong Legislative Council member for 6 years. Under the new law, it's possible he could even be arrested for talking to us, but he's chosen to speak out nonetheless. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Leung Kwok Hung, Longhair, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders. It's a very difficult situation in Hong Kong right now. From when the world looks in, certainly us in the US and other countries, my home country, Canada, it looks like a very, very difficult situation. And you are kind of in the thick of things underground. You've been a legislative council member for many years. You've been very active in the politics. And I think it's fair to say you've been on the forefront of trying to preserve or create freedoms for Hong Kongers. Tell me, what is the situation on the ground as we speak?
Actually, we are in a status, you can call it, in a reign of terror. But the terror, of course, is compared to what happened in the mainland, is still, well, it's not so harsh as what happened in mainland, but it is the beginning since the imposition of the state security law in Hong Kong.
So when you are talking to people, on the street, basically people in your community, what is it that they're telling you? What is that you're seeing out there right now?
I think, well, it happened so quickly, so that not many people can understand, because the imposition of the national security law actually started in May, when the National Congress assembled in Beijing, and then they start the whole legislation and imposition. So the people were shocked, and now they are still in the same situation. It's shocking. In 2003, the Chinese authority had tried to making the legislation of Article 23 in Hong Kong at that time, but there were more than 500,000 people took to the street, and then they retreat. And since then, I need to remind you, the chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, said that about a few months ago, she thought that at that time that she will not start any procedure of the legislation of Article 23. She emphasized that she will not have the support of the Legislative Council and the people of Hong Kong. So that's what she tried to convince us. Forget about it. I will not do it. And all of a sudden, it start all from April. If I can correct my memory, it started from April, and a lot of Chinese official and loyalists to the Communist Party in Hong Kong, they talk about the loophole of the state security in Hong Kong. So they start to say that, well, maybe there should be some kind of legislation of this state security law. It took less than 2 months, and then the whole thing was done. It's stunning.
It's absolutely incredible. Something just struck me as you were speaking. You and actually 14 other quite high-profile pro-democracy, pro-freedom activists were arrested in April. And this was, of course, before the national security law. But do you think there's some connection?
Oh, yeah. I think it's a signal that they will not tolerate on any kind of civil disobedient activity in Hong Kong, and also since those who were arrested, they were legislator or former legislator, and it shows that Beijing had already at that time considered it's a time for the crackdown in a certain extent.
In May, you were being asked to kind of respond to the charges. And I think your quote was, "I understand the government is rubbish."
Yeah. I think. Well, if any regime try to arrest those people who just try to hold peaceful demonstrations or peaceful procession, I think it's outrageous. Why? Because at that time, hundreds of thousands of people want to take to the street, but the police refused to grant a license for the procession. That's why we say that, okay, now it's the time for us to exercise our own right. I mean, how can you stop people? I mean, it counted by hundreds of thousands of people. If you can call them illegal or unlawful, where's the law? Rule of law, not rule by law. It's a matter of whether the people of Hong Kong can exercise the right of freedom of assembly or not. Since then, I have been arrested for 3 times for the same offense. Yeah.
So tell me, how is it that we're talking to each other right now if you've been arrested so many times, even in the last few months?
Since last June, when the movement fighting for freedoms start, I think up until now, there are more than 9,000 citizens of Hong Kong have been arrested. It's a lot. It's a lot. 9,000 more than. So for me, I think, well, I'm quite lucky in a certain extent that I didn't arrest for more severe charges. It's just like Jimmy Like. He didn't do anything. He's running a news agents and a newspaper or a publication group, but he was arrested for collusion with the foreign country. I mean, this is outrageous.
So what is the significance of this arrest? What do you think it means in a bigger sense? Is this because this is probably the highest profile arrest? And
I think a lot of I think I need to make sure you understand a lot of those individuals who are quite prominent or who are quite well-known political activists or legislators or former legislators, they have been followed by some kind of agents for almost 24 hours. It's a threat. When I was preparing for this interview, I just watched a live broadcasting from the Facebook of a legislator who have been followed by strangers for 2 days, and then he opposed to those people who were in a vehicle, and those people in the vehicle drove on him, and he was slightly injured. But what can you do? The policemen were there, but they couldn't do anything about it. Since I think it's due to the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong. So in a certain extent, it opened the gate for them to just walk in. before the imposition, if we found out we were followed by some of the strangers, and then we will report to the media and the police, because there's no right for any person who try to enforce their law in Hong Kong. Now, after the imposition of the state security law in Hong Kong, and then of course they are lawful to do so.
I mean, it creates a kind of atmosphere of fear, I think. This is kind of what you're telling me. And frankly, our journalists, we also have a couple of our journalists that are also being followed, at least. Those are the ones that noticed. So I understand what you're talking about very clearly.
The article of the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong, Article 62, this law shall prevail where provisions of the local laws of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region are inconsistent with this law. This law will override basic law. The Article 65 read, the power of interpretation of this law shall be vested in the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. And Article 60, the acts performed in the course of duty by the Office of Safeguarding National Security of the Central People's Government in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and its staff in accordance with this law shall not be subject to the jurisdiction of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. In the course of performing duty, a holder of an identification document or a document of certification issued by the office and the article including vehicles used by the holder shall not be subject to inspection, search, or detention by law enforcement officers of the region. The office and its staff shall enjoy other rights and immunities provided by laws of the region. When you go through the article, you know that the consequence of the imposition of the state security law in Hong Kong actually is like the rule of law in Hong Kong does not exist anymore, because there are something who are above the basic law and the law of Hong Kong and even the jurisdictions of Hong Kong. So it's very difficult. Hong Kong will become Orwellian society gradually. So, have you read a novel of George Orwell? 1984. Yeah. So that's what happened here gradually.
I've never heard those articles. I've read through the national security law, but when you were reading them just now, especially the last one, which tells us that the officers basically have unrestricted power, right, to operate in Hong Kong, it sent a chill up my spine, because it's, I don't know how else one could read it than how you describe it.
Yeah, but it's black and white. You can go to the internet. You can find it out very easily if you type in with the keyword. I'm not telling lies. It's a plain truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you see, you're saying we're heading gradually into an Orwellian 1984 type society. First of all, do you expect that the press freedom will be hit?
Yeah, first of all, after 2 decades of, buying of the major or investment of the major TV stations and blah, 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 the newspapers, actually, I think Apple Daily is the only one who still got the guts and also got the independency to say what they like to say. You know, that is quite bad. But so that is why Jimmy Lai becomes the target of the political persecutions in the name of prosecution, because by doing so, actually there will be no platform for the oppositions to voice out their demand. You know, I'm not saying that Hong Kong is a totalitarian society now, but the self-censorship. If you go through the details and articles of the state security law in Hong Kong, you feel chilling. So what will you do? You will say that, should I say that, or should I not say that? You know, I mean, it's a self-censorship. Just like if I talk to you just right now, if bear in mind I said, oh, maybe something I said will make me into troubles. Of course, I'm concerned, and then I will try to not saying something that I think it will make me in a very, very devastated situation. Though that is, you know, that is the, you know, if you read the novels of George Orwell, Animal Farm or 1948, you know, hey, Big Brother is watching you. So, you know what I mean? That is it. You know, to compare, you know, I think it might be a very strange feeling for the Hong Kong people when they watch the movie or read the literature, or when they watch the news that in somewhere, in some place, in some times, some of those dissidents were arrested and persecuted. But now it happened it began to happen in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? For a lot of Hong Kong people, they will never think of Jimmy like such a figure will be arrested and harassed openly. You know, it's like a show. 200 strong policemen marching into a media group, and they search. It's a show to the whole world and Hong Kong people that they are, you know, the Hong Kong government is really reckless and powerful. So you know, it's just like you kill the mobs and the gangsters. They need to kill people on the street in order to threaten the people. You know what I mean? You know, it's different from what happened in China. In China, the Chinese authority tried to keep it secret. Nobody can witness the arrest of Mr. Liu Xiaobo. Since Liu Xiaobo was arrested, he will never be in any kind of news coverage. You know what I mean? It's different tactic, it's different strategy. Now what in Hong Kong is like a circus, or like what happened in the dark ages around the world. You know, they execute the people and hang their head on a post in order to make an example of someone who are eager to fight, to resist.
Wow. Yeah, it's very hard to fathom. Oh, and I wanted to say, you know, there is one other media that's for sure independent in Hong Kong.
I think maybe they're the second target. I wish them good luck.
Yeah.
We all know that.
Yeah. I have to ask you this, okay? I'm very curious. You know, your background, I think originally you actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I understand, that you kind of ascribed to a kind of Maoist philosophy many years ago, right?
Yeah, so when I was a student, a secondary student, and then I found out Maoism is a big lie, and then I actually I'm a socialist. Well, I became a Trotskyite, and then since then I think my political position, what I think is a democratic socialist. I think socialism should be uh, should be conduct in a real democracy. Otherwise, there was no way to achieve the goal of socialism anyway.
Interesting. Well, it just, I was kind of, it might be surprising to some people who, when you say, well, I have socialist beliefs, but to talk about 1984 the way you do, right? Because some people equate the two, right?
Yeah. But I mean, George Orwell, actually, he was a socialist, and then after he went to Spain and took part in the Civil War, and then he fought, and then he shift. But I think in the end of the day, he's a liberal socialist anyway. And you know, the novel 1984 didn't just have any just didn't just criticize the Soviet Union, and George Orwell was quite aware of the rising of the USA, and then he thought that USA maybe will become some kind of totalitarianism regime as well. So, but it's a it's this kind of political analysis. I think in my mind during we are in the era of globalizations, and globalization actually the major player, not many, USA, China, EU, and so I think it's a time for us to think about that, whether the globalization, which have been dominated by the Greek power like G8, what is G8? It's G3. You know what I mean? The USA is the leader of the Five Eye Alliance, and then EU, and then China. So I think it's a time for us to think about what is the future of the human being, and I think as I said before, capitalism. I think it need to fix it out, whether it is a system that can have any kind of sustain, you know, to, in the long term running, whether that's the future. That's what I say.
No, and it's, I mean, it's frankly, 1984 is a very important, I guess, parable or, tons of lessons to be learned. Doesn't matter whether it's Soviet Union or the United States or the EU or certainly China.
Yeah. We cannot just look up to the leaders and the Greek power. That's one of the thought when I was when I think about the future of Hong Kong. We cannot just suspect, or we cannot rely on USA to impose sanction in order to help out the situation in Hong Kong. We all know that.
Well, so let's talk about that. There are, for example, on Iran, right? The U.S. has some pretty strict and harsh sanctions, but a lot more than what exists on Hong Kong. Do you think? Let's not talk just about the U.S., right? Let's talk about, there are a lot of international powers right now are thinking about how to help Hong Kongers, the Hong Kongers that seek freedom. Is sanctions a good tool for this in your mind?
Well, I think most of the country, when they think about sanctions, they are thinking about whether sanctions will be harmful to their own business community in the first place. I don't think any leaders on this earth will say that I'm going to do the sanction, even though it will make the economy or the business community uh, uh, will will be uh, will be damaging by doing so. It's back to the square one is that I mean it's up to the political leaders to decide whether they will impose the sanction or not. You know, what on the earth can anyone on this earth can impose any uh, things on a guy called Donald Trump? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. So I think what happened here is that when they charge Jimmy Like, when they arrest Jimmy Lai for offense for the alleged offenses of collusion with the foreign countries. I mean, how can he do so? He cannot. You know, maybe he deserves 15 minutes talk to Donald Trump or Vice President Pence. If you talk, and then you will get the punishment. Practically, you will not talk. Yeah, that's it.
Hopefully, our talk doesn't involve any punishment, but I frankly worry about things like that, which is one of the reasons I'm not talking with a lot of people in Hong Kong right now.
Yeah, it's a threat. Yeah, it's like a whitewash, reign of terror, because people are quite. It's quite scary, because you're right. I mean, that's what I try to emphasize the novel of 1984 because this is a very good example that everything you talk about will be in a record. So the freedom of speech will let you to something that you lost your freedom. So it's like a paradox. If you exercise a part of your right and then you will lose all of your rights. It end up in a prison. I mean, just like what the disqualification of the candidate or a person like me disqualified 3 years ago when I was a legislator. Talking about election, if you elect an officer who are trying to do the censorship of the candidates, so what is free election? That means the candidate are free to say what they say in order to gain the support of the voters. If you cannot say what you say, or if you say what you say and then you cannot take part in the election, I mean, it's a paradox. You know what I mean? You can say what you like if you're not a candidate of the office on daily basis. But once you try to take part in the election as a candidate, and then they will follow all of the record to check that whether you are qualified or not, whether you have said something that to show that to give them an excuse to disqualify you. For example, if the voters, they will cast their vote to see whether a person like me or a person like you are they in support of the basic law or loyal to the Hong Kong special administrative region. It's for the voter to say. It's not for the officers to say. The officers, they are just a puppet, political puppet or two. Is it? How can they got the knowledge? I mean, that is the problem of of the so-called state security. My theory is very simple. State security should be the security of the civilian or citizen of a country in the first place. So that will imply that the freedom of the citizen will go first instead of the choice of the regime. That is very, very simple. Of the people, by the people, and you know what I mean, it's like
No, I
for the people.
understand. And it's very interesting because it seems like this law has also reached out, kind of into America actually, because we have, Samuel Chu, who of course has been, a big supporter of freedom in Hong Kong and so forth, and helping, connect legislators. You have him now being targeted using the national security law.
Yes. But because according to the security law, whether you are a Chinese citizen or not, if you if they the prosecution think that you have violate any article of the state security law, and then you are subject to the punishment. If they can arrest you, they arrest you, no matter where you are. For example, if anyone who are on the soil of USA or Singapore, if the authority thinks that they have done something who are against the law, and then they will try to do the law enforcement. That means if they can arrest you, and then they will arrest you.
So we've had this raid on the Apple Daily, and Jimmy Lai arrested. We've had a number of other people arrested in Hong Kong. What do you think will happen next?
In the first place, I think they will concentrate on the Jimmy Lai's case in the first place, because it's a very, very significant case. Maybe, well, for me, there are 4 kinds of offenses: collusion with the foreign country, and also the subversion, secession, and terrorist activity. There is one offense not have been used. It's the subversion. So maybe they will try to find an example for that subversion. The terrorist activity they have done. So accordingly, for my experience of the attitude of the CCP, they once the policy the strategy have been fixed up, and then they will have some kind of policy and legislation, and then maybe they will try to arrest someone in order to show that the state of security law is a need for the Hong Kong or the Chinese communist regime to safeguard their national security. Then I don't know. I can't say much about it, but there are. I think maybe they will do it. I can't say that. I cannot predict it, but I think. But first of all, they will concentrate on the Jimmy Lai's case. Up until now, Jimmy Lai is not haven't been press charged. He was arrested, and then he was on police bail, and I think the investigation of the alleged offense or alleged crime, whatever you say, will carry on, and I think maybe more people will be arrested on his case, maybe, or related to his case.
Are you yourself concerned about being put in jail, I guess, again?
I don't know yet, but talking about it when you have to face the threat of the safeguarding national security law in Hong Kong, and in, I mean, it is very difficult for you to guess, because basically, I think, see what happened to Mr. Liu Xiaobo, and then you can guess what had he done. Basically, he just tried to use a peaceful way to arouse the attention of the Hong Kong people. There should be a constitutional reform in China, democracy in China, and then he was arrested. Before his arrest, he was surrounded by a bunch of officers of the Bureau of State Security on 24 hours. So how can he possibly do anything? I mean, it's a matter of whether the Chinese Communist Party will decide to show the whole world that if anyone who want to enjoy the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, blah 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 blah, and then they will be punished as an example of the necessity of their legislation and they got enactment of the so-called safeguard national security law.
What do you think it would take then, given you're talking about this sort of gradual descent into an Orwellian society? What would it take to stop that from happening, to keep the freedoms in Hong Kong?
First of all, we need to have a hope, and we need not to scare ourselves to death. You know what I mean? We should try hard to exercise our rights as usual. For example, if I after this interview, and then I will be arrested.
I hope not.
If I think that, I will not talk to you then about a lot of things. You know what I mean? I mean, when I think about this, I was quite upset or feeling some kind of ridiculous, because about 4 decades ago, I usually to go work hard for the activity in support of those political activists or sometimes political prisoners in China. So for Wei Jingsheng, I remember the first time I was arrested and sentencing to jail is because I took part or I organized a march and an assembly in support of Wei Jingsheng and in protest of the arrest of Wei Jingsheng, and condemned the crackdown on the democracy war in Beijing at that time. So for me, it seems that after 40 years, there may be something like what happened in Wei Jingsheng at that time. And talking about Mr. Wang Dan, what he was a prominent student leader during the pro-democracy movement in China, and he was arrested, and then he would be arrested. So it seems to me that I can't hardly imagine something will happen in Hong Kong now. Maybe someone will in support of us around the world to say, oh, release blah 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 blah, release blah 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 blah, release of Jimmy, like something like this. You know what I mean? The Amnesty International, maybe they will be quite busy for the release of the political or the prisoner of conscience in Hong Kong. It's very sad and it's unreal for me. Usually we watch TV and say, oh, there are someone around the world who were arrested by their government. Or that is my feeling.
No, that's, as you're describing the situation, it's kind of like actually just going about your business with the freedoms you had before almost becomes a subversive act in itself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But talking about something relate to the religion, freedom of religion. In a certain extent, those major leaders of different religions in Hong Kong, they didn't say anything against or in protest of the imposition of the safeguarding national security law in Hong Kong. You see what happened in China, yeah, the boss of the Hong Kong and Macau Affair Bureau, Mr. Sha Baolong, actually he was quite famous to order the tearing down of the cross on the rooftop of the church in China. He was one of those people who got the sanctions. So think about that. When those religious leaders, they keep their mouth shut to try to get away from troubles, do they understand what happened in China?
Yeah. No, and one notable exception, I think, is now retired Cardinal Zen, who was...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew him for a long time. But that's what I said. It's like every people feel threatened, and in the whole community silence. That is the major effect that the tyrant wants, for just to keep your mouth shut. The imposition of the safeguarding national security law in Hong Kong is like that. You feel threatened.
Longhair, it's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Yes, hope to talk to you next time, okay?
I look forward to that. And please stay safe.